Hi, this is Peggy from War. So today our guest is David Reeve. So David is the CEO and founder of InvestorCOM. So InvestorCOM provides regulatory compliance and communication solution to wealth managers. So thank you so much, David, for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Peggy. It's really great to be with you.
No, that's really a pleasure. To hear your thoughts. You've been in the industry for many years, so I'm sure you have a lot of insights to share. So let's start with the first question. So from your perspective, what will be some of the lasting impacts of COVID in the financial services industry?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say our lens is, primarily wealth management. So my comments will be directed at that sector, and then, perhaps with some general views as well. And of course, within wealth, we kind of live in the world of compliance. I think we're going to see, obviously a more permanent shift to remote work, and this creates, significant challenges across every industry for sure within financial services and wealth. One area is collaboration. I think in the first few months, everyone's sort of enjoying the change, as we all do. But, as that sort of settles in, how do you create a collaborative environment? And, I think leadership will become a really, really big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
In our specific dealing with wealth managers, think about compliance and surveillance that, now is taking on a totally remote posture. And I think, the key will be to have some pretty solid technology solutions in place to do that. One super quick example, when you think of advisors providing advice to investors, they've moved largely from, face-to-face meetings to video conference communications. And so that alone creates a significant record-keeping challenge. And, how do you ensure that you're, managing those communications and surveilling those communications correctly? I think the last thing I would say is, I think the medium to long-term impact will be negative, I'm afraid. I think we're experiencing soft market recovery supported by the tech sector, but in my view, sustained recovery will be many months or years away. And ultimately, this slow recovery is going to create a fair amount of stress on the wealth management sector.
Mm-hmm. So you do obviously a lot of work on the compliance side. You mentioned regulatory changes to accommodate obviously some of the challenges linked with remote. What type of new regulations do you see coming down the pipeline?
Well, I think regardless of who's in government, new regulations will continue, particularly again in the wealth sector. There's a pretty significant global movement, and this is not new. I'd say over the last decade that really, is all about supporting and protecting the best interest of the investor. Which many in the industry would say is overdue, by the way. And so this momentum is, in my opinion, too strong to reverse. Again, regardless of who is in government, in specifically in our world, our view, kind of the U.S. and Canada. And, one example is the recent implementation of Reg BI, which is the best interest regulation in the U.S. The SEC sort of continued with their June 30th deadline, which is just a few weeks ago, regardless of COVID-19, regardless of, other opposition in the industry. And in Canada, as you're well aware, there's a pending kind of similar best interest regulation called client focus reforms. And so those are two examples that of some of the regulation that is continuing, and I think that's fairly representative of really what's happening in the Western world.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about the global financial order, and obviously we've seen tremendous amounts of debts in countries, the challenge between US and China and the rest of the world right now. What do you see the global financial order becoming?
It's interesting. Unfortunately, I think COVID-19 will continue to drive some protectionist and nationalist agendas, which ultimately isn't positive for global cooperation and trade. And so that's a direct impact. And, I think that's completely understandable. Governments are focused on the health of their people, their own economic recovery. And so, just globalization on the agenda is certainly dropped down a few notches. And, again, I think that's, I can't imagine a government that wouldn't put kind of health and economic kind of well-being of their population at the top of the agenda. But I think when you combine the this kind of COVID shock, we'll call it, with some of the political movements, and specifically in the U.S. and the U.K., which have been traditionally global-oriented economies. So now you're combining the shock of COVID with some of these political movements, which perhaps may not be long, but again, I think it creates a bigger challenge around globalization and trade, and so I think ultimately that's going to create more economic challenge in the coming decade.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of resetting competitive positioning, obviously the crisis is a good opportunity for some people to benefit from the changes. What do you see happening, and who would be the winners or the losers from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And and I think the answer I would have is pretty common. You certainly hear a lot of people talking about technology, and that may sound somewhat self-serving to our business, but it's for sure a popular response. But I do think tech investments will drive success in the new normal. Looking, for example, at the wealth sector, I would say this generally favors some of the larger players who have made investments in technology, although many mid-sized firms are modernizing their technology stack to thrive in a remote environment. But if there's one silver bullet, I would say that would be it. I think a close second, and I think it's an emerging issue, and that is leadership. So over the course of the last few months, as organizations have moved almost to an entirely kind of remote posture, many leaders, I think, have communicated more, have made some adjustments to support these folks. But as time goes on, I think there's going to be need to be a major adjustment in leadership style to truly support remote professionals. I think those that do that well will create competitive advantage.
Yeah. I think the knowledge transfer from folks who are experienced to younger folks is becoming extremely difficult in the current environment. So it's great to work from home, but all the soft things you were learning. I remember being a junior, and after a meeting, my boss would explain me, okay, that's the body language, that's the context, this is why that guy said that. Well, now you lose all of that, so
Yeah.
I hear you, leadership.
And I think to your point, Peggy, you can't underestimate the value of that. I'll call it very informal coaching, and we just don't have that. And just going back to kind of thinking about how you lead in the future, I do think finding ways to provide that very specific feedback and coaching will be extremely important. And it's not a natural muscle reaction when you're on a Zoom call or in a Teams call or on a WebEx call or on a telephone call. You really need to almost schedule that time to be I think very proactive and and very specific around providing that kind of leadership coaching.
Exactly. And from I would say an incumbent transformation perspective, where do you see the impact of COVID in this transformation?
Well, I think if you look at the overall FI sector, most of the reading that I've done would say that there's a real opportunity for the new entrants to be essentially some of the more aggressive big tech businesses that really want to expand their financial services offering. And so I think that's just reality, and it certainly will happen in the retail and payments and perhaps corporate banking side. I'm not so sure on the wealth side that that's going to be a big impact. In fact, some of the reading recently is there's actually been a reduction in terms of the expansion of robo advice, for example, in this new world. So I do think that a lot of the traditional wealth businesses, assuming they make the right investments in tech to maintain their leadership position, I don't think that there will be a big transformation there. For sure, there'll be a continuation of consolidation, particularly if you look at the U.S. wealth sector, which is highly fragmented. You're going to see more and more of that. which, you know, I think was happening anyways, but I think that will just accelerate as we operate in a more of a remote and tech-oriented world. And the only other thing I would say is, you know, when you think about wealth and you think about transformation, you think about new entrants, you know, trust between human beings will continue to be the paramount factor. So regardless of all the kind of shifting of the landscape, you know, finding ways to have, you know, very meaningful, trustful conversations with, you know, with clients will be, you know, absolutely critical.
Yeah. And from your perspective, so did you have a chance to pick up new habits? I know you're an avid biker. Maybe you've had more time to bike during the pandemic. Any new things from David 2.0?
I would say, you know, I would say a couple of things. I'd say certainly on our business, you will know that we're on a. Are you hearing that, Peggy?
Yes, I am.
I'm not sure what's causing that, but there's a bunch of feedback here. You know, I think on the business front, I think you're well aware that we're on a digital transformation journey in our business as we try and become more software focused. So this period of time has for sure accelerated that. You know, we're also entering a new market, U.S. market, and you know, and I think what's been great about this kind of virtual kind of period of commerce is it's actually, you know, made it easier to enter new markets because, you know, when you think of incumbent players that might have sort of what might be considered a home court advantage, that playing field has been leveled. So, you know, I think for our business has been interesting. I count myself as extremely lucky. On a personal level, I think, you know, there's a couple things. For sure, you know, the focus on routines is really important. It's very easy to, you know, move to 14-hour days and, you know, your calendar gets filled with meetings and ignore things like you mentioned, exercise and, you know, just alternate activities. Yes, it's been gorgeous for biking. So I've been on my bike a lot and swimming a lot and whatnot. But you know, one of the other big changes that I've talked to a lot of my friends about, you know, on a personal level, is I'd say there's a radical change in spending habits, which we all know, and you know, which to me is a huge positive. I think will be a semi-permanent reset. I think we all need to support sort of the recovery of our, you know, hospitality sector and restaurants and whatnot. But I'll tell you, you know, kind of that big change in spending habits, I think is actually a real positive that has come out of this period of time, kind of, you know, a big reset.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see a lot of restaurants that have reopened in my neighborhood. In pre-COVID world, I would be out at least 3 days a week, and now I'm doing that once a week. That's fine. That's good enough. So I see what you're saying, but. Thank you so much, David, for taking the time to share your thoughts today, and enjoy the summer, enjoy the biking.
Thank you, Peggy. Really great to see you, and lovely to do this on a Friday morning. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you very much.